Warning: this content may be unsuitable for viewers under 18 years of age and those sensitive to fear, horror, or disturbing psychological content. If you are under 18 or sensitive to frightening material, please stop reading now. You already know Halloween is the one night a year when the whole country gives itself permission to be afraid. People dress up. They knock on strangers' doors. They walk through the dark in crowds of costumed figures, and nobody thinks twice about it, because that's the deal. That's the unspoken contract of October 31st. Everyone is pretending. But what if some of them aren't? What if the figure standing motionless at the end of your driveway isn't a neighbor's kid in a rubber mask? What if the person who followed you 3 blocks after the block party stopped following you? Not because they got bored, but because they found a better angle. These are real stories. They happened to real people. Some of them are still processing what they saw. Others have moved on, but they never go trick-or-treating alone anymore. And a few of them, the ones you'll read about in the middle of this, never fully recovered at all. Every single one of these accounts was collected from first-person testimonies, local news archives, and verified community reports across the United States. The names have been changed to protect the people involved. Everything else is exactly as it happened. Let's start in Ohio. The cornfield, Athens County, Ohio. October 31st, 2017. Marcus Webb had done the Halloween corn maze every year since he was 9 years old. He was 26 now, and the tradition hadn't changed much. He'd drive out to Harmon's farm on Route 33 with a group of friends, pay the $8 admission, grab a flashlight from the bucket by the entrance, and spend 45 minutes pretending to be more scared than he actually was. It was fun. It was reliably, safely fun. That year, the group was smaller than usual. His girlfriend, Dana, had bailed at the last minute with a migraine. His college roommate, Tyler, had driven up from Columbus but left early after getting a work call. So it was just Marcus, his neighbor Kara, and Kara's boyfriend, a quiet guy named Devin, who Marcus had only met twice before. They entered the maze at 9:14 p.m. Marcus remembered the time because he'd checked his phone just before they handed over their flashlights and started in. The first 15 minutes were completely normal. The stalks were dry and clicking in the October wind. Their flashlight beams swept left and right through the turns. Devin made a couple of bad jokes. Kara screamed at a plastic skeleton that jumped from a spring-loaded box in one of the dead ends. Marcus laughed. It was exactly what it was supposed to be. Then the flashlight died. Marcus shook it, slapped the side of it. Nothing. He told the others to hold still and got his phone out for the flashlight app. But the phone had no signal and the battery had dropped to 4%, seemingly out of nowhere. When he turned the phone's screen toward Kara and Devin for light, he noticed Devin wasn't where he'd been standing 30 seconds before. "Devin?" Kara called out. No answer. "He probably went ahead," Marcus said. "Devin, hold up, man." The corn shifted to their right, not the whole field, just a single row, as if something was moving along it parallel to them, about 8 feet away at a walking pace. "Devin, that's not funny," Kara said. The movement stopped. Marcus held his phone up. The 4% battery threw just enough light to see about 6 feet ahead. What he saw in that 6 feet was a path turning sharply left, and at the edge of the turn, a shape. It was a person. It was wearing a full-body costume, gray, formless, the kind of thing you'd see in a cheap discount store Halloween bin. The face was covered in a blank white oval mask, with no features except 2 eye holes. The figure was standing completely still, facing them. "Devin, take the mask off," Marcus said. The figure didn't move. Kara grabbed Marcus's arm. "That's not Devin's costume," she whispered. "Devin came as a zombie. He's wearing torn-up clothes and face paint." "That's not him." The figure took one step toward them. Marcus made a decision in about half a second. He grabbed Kara's wrist and they ran, not forward through the maze, but straight through the cornstalk rows, crashing through the dry stalks sideways, in what he estimated was the direction of the outer edge. He didn't look back. Kara was screaming, or maybe he was screaming, or maybe both of them were, and the corn was cracking and snapping around them like something out of a nightmare, and then suddenly they were out, stumbling into a harvested field beside the maze, the lights of Harmon's farm parking lot visible maybe 200 yards away. Devon was in the parking lot. He'd gotten separated at a fork in the maze, found his way out the normal exit, and had been waiting for them for almost 20 minutes. He had no idea who had been standing in the maze. The farm owner, when Marcus reported it, said they'd had complaints from 2 other groups that night about an unidentified person in a gray costume who wasn't part of their hired scare crew. The hired crew wore orange armbands for identification. The figure Marcus described had no armbands. To this day, nobody knows who it was or what they wanted. The trick-or-treater who came back. Naperville, Illinois, October 31st, 2019. Jenna Kowalski loved Halloween with the kind of enthusiasm that made her the neighborhood MVP every year. She decorated her front porch, starting October 1st. By the end of the month, her house on Clover Court looked like a haunted Victorian manor had somehow materialized in a quiet Illinois suburb. She had a fog machine, a motion-activated ghost that dropped from the oak tree by the front steps, and, her personal favorite, a cauldron of dry ice smoke that sat on the porch railing and spilled down the front steps in an eerie white cascade. She gave out full-size candy bars. She was that neighbor. October 31st, 2019, was a warm night for the season. High 50s, no wind, a nearly full moon. The trick-or-treaters started at 5:30 and came in steady waves until about 8:15, when the crowds thinned out to the occasional straggler. At 8:47, a child appeared at the bottom of her porch steps. The child was wearing a clown costume, standard enough for Halloween, red wig, white face, oversized polka-dot jumpsuit, but something about the way the child was standing stopped Jenna mid-reach into the candy cauldron. The child wasn't holding a bag. Every trick-or-treater Jenna had seen all night had a bag, a plastic pumpkin, a pillowcase, a CVS bag with handles, something. This child had nothing. "Hey, sweetie," Jenna said. "Did you lose your candy bag?" The child didn't answer, just stood there looking up at her with the painted-on smile of the clown mask. "Where are your parents, honey?" No answer. Jenna looked up and down the street. There were still a few small groups of costumed kids moving in both directions on the sidewalk, accompanied by adults with phone flashlights. Nobody was looking for a missing child. Nobody was calling out. She looked back at her porch steps. The child was gone. Jenna assumed the kid had just wandered off, maybe gotten spooked by the fog machine, and she went back inside. She sat down on the couch with a glass of wine and turned on a movie. At 9:20, she heard the fog machine on the porch shut itself off, which it did automatically when the dry ice reservoir ran out, and the click of it made her glance toward the front window. The clown was standing in her front yard. Same costume, same stillness, but now much, much closer, maybe 12 feet from her window. Jenna called 911. She told them there was a person in a costume standing in her yard and she felt unsafe. The dispatcher stayed on the line with her while a patrol unit responded. The officers arrived 7 minutes later. By then, the yard was empty, but the responding officer noticed something before he left. The gate on the side of Jenna's house, which led to the backyard, was open. She was certain she had closed and latched it that morning. She was absolutely certain. The officer walked the perimeter of her property and found no one. He suggested it might have been a neighborhood kid who'd just been curious about her decorations. He said it politely and probably believed it. Jenna installed a full camera system the next week. She's never seen the clown figure on any of the footage since. But every year on October 31st, she goes to her sister's house and doesn't come home until November 1st. She never found out who was standing in her yard. The party that wasn't a party. Portland, Oregon, October 31st, 2021. Alicia Tran was 23 years old and new to Portland when her co-worker invited her to a Halloween party. She didn't know the city well. She didn't know her co-worker, Steph, that well either. They'd worked together at the same marketing agency for 2 months, had eaten lunch together maybe 4 times, and Alicia had decided that an invitation to a Halloween party was exactly the kind of social bridge she needed to actually feel at home somewhere new. She said yes. The address Steph texted her was in a part of northeast Portland that Alicia didn't recognize. She drove through it twice before she found the right street, a narrow residential road with tall fir trees on both sides and houses set back from the road, most of them dark. The house at the address Steph had given her looked like the others. Dark windows, no cars in the driveway, no decorations. Alicia texted Steph, "Is this the right address? It looks empty." Steph's reply, "Ha ha ha, yes. We're all in the basement. Come around the side. Gates open." Alicia sat in her car for a moment. She heard nothing from inside the house. No music, no voices. She looked at the address again to confirm it matched, then got out. The gate on the side of the house was indeed open. She went through it into the backyard, which was unlit and heavily shadowed under more fir trees. She saw a door at the back of the house with a narrow strip of light visible under it. She moved toward it. She was about 15 feet from the door when she felt the specific, electrical, animal certainty that someone was behind her. She turned around. There was a figure at the gate she'd come through, not moving, not making a sound, wearing what appeared to be a black hooded costume with a mask that she couldn't make out in the darkness, but she could see the pale oval of it catching the minimal light from the street. "Steph?" Alicia said, knowing already that it wasn't Steph. The figure didn't move. Alicia did not walk back toward the gate. She ran to the door with the light under it and shoved it open, and found herself in a lit laundry room, with a washer and dryer and a cat bowl on the floor and no people, no party, no anything. She shouted for Steph. She shouted for anyone. A woman appeared from a hallway, startled, confused, not in costume. She had no idea who Alicia was. She had never heard of Steph. She had never sent an invitation to a party. She looked genuinely terrified, which made Alicia realize how terrified she herself was, and they both ended up standing in the laundry room for 2 full minutes while the woman called her husband in from upstairs and Alicia called 911. The police found no one in the backyard. The gate was closed. Steph, when Alicia called her the next morning, was horrified. She had sent the party address correctly, and it was in northwest Portland, not northeast. The address she had sent was 2847 NW Furcroft. The address Alicia had gone to was 2847 NE Furcroft. Different neighborhoods, different houses, a wrong turn, a 1-letter mistake on a compass direction in the middle of a city. Who was in that backyard? Nobody knows. The homeowners had no answers and no security footage. They had not been aware of any unusual activity that night. Alicia moved back to Sacramento 4 months later. She said Portland had nothing to do with it, but she also said she still doesn't go anywhere she doesn't already know well on Halloween. You might be tempted, at this point, to apply a rational framework. You might say, a figure in a corn maze is just a weirdo who paid admission. A clown in someone's yard is a neighborhood kid whose parents didn't notice they'd wandered. A person in a backyard is someone who was checking out the neighborhood, or a drunk partygoer from 2 streets over who was lost. You might be right. On any given night, in any given city, the most likely explanation for strange behavior is ordinary strangeness. Bad judgment, harmless boundary crossing, bored teenagers, adults who made a poor decision. But here's what makes October 31st different. On every other night of the year, if you see a masked figure standing still in the dark watching your house, you call 911 and everyone treats it as a serious threat. On Halloween, there's a 2-second moment of evaluation. Is this normal or not normal? And during those 2 seconds, the worst possible outcomes can begin. The costume is the perfect camouflage. The night is designed, culturally and socially, to lower your guard. These next stories make that point in ways that are difficult to dismiss. The Neighbor Nobody Knew, Tucson, Arizona. October 31st, 2018. Sandra Okafor had lived on her street in Tucson's Rincon Heights neighborhood for 11 years. She knew every family on the block. She knew which houses gave out candy, which ones put up elaborate decorations, which dads went too hard on the spooky sound effects and made the 5-year-olds cry. She did not know the man in the yellow rain slicker. He appeared at approximately 7 p.m., which was peak trick-or-treat traffic in the neighborhood. Sandra noticed him because he wasn't moving with the flow of the pedestrian crowd the way everyone else was. He was standing on the opposite sidewalk, roughly across from her house, holding nothing. No candy, no child, no phone. He was watching the trick-or-treaters move from house to house. She thought nothing of it for the first hour. People watched from their driveways. Some neighbors sat on lawn chairs and just enjoyed the spectacle. Standing and watching wasn't suspicious. But at 8 p.m., when the crowds had thinned significantly and most of the families with young children had gone home, the man in the yellow slicker was still there. Same spot, same stillness. Sandra walked to her front door and looked out. He was looking at her house. She went and got her husband, Kevin, who came to the door and confirmed he saw what Sandra saw. Kevin was 6'2" and built like he'd played college football, which he had, and he walked down the front path and across the street. "Hey," Kevin said, "you live around here?" The man looked at Kevin for a moment. Then he looked past him, at Sandra, who was standing in the doorway. Then he turned and walked away down the sidewalk in the direction of the main road. Kevin came back and said the man hadn't said a word. No greeting, no explanation, nothing. At 9:15, their 12-year-old daughter came home from trick-or-treating with a group of friends. She mentioned, casually, that a man in a yellow rain jacket had followed their group for about 3 blocks before they'd noticed and looped back toward their street. They'd assumed he was the dad of one of the other kids. Nobody knew whose dad he was. Sandra called the non-emergency police line that night. The officer she spoke to said there was nothing actionable to report, but suggested she note the description. Yellow rain slicker, medium height, male, no visible face covering, no distinguishing features she could recall. 3 days later, she saw the same yellow slicker in the lost and found photo board of a Facebook group for the neighborhood. A family 2 streets over had found it hanging on their backyard fence on the morning of November 1st. They had no idea how it got there. The man was never identified. The House That Gave Out Nothing. Memphis, Tennessee, October 31st, 2020. Elijah Drummond was 11 years old and in 5th grade when the worst Halloween of his life happened, though he wouldn't understand the full weight of it until he was much older. He was trick-or-treating with his older cousin Marcus, who was 15, in the Midtown neighborhood of Memphis. It was his first year being allowed to go without a parent directly accompanying them. Their moms were one street over, handling the younger kids, and Elijah and Marcus had been given a 6-block radius and a 1-hour window. At the end of one of the blocks was a house with the lights on. Every Halloween, experienced trick-or-treaters know the lights-on rule. Porch light on means come to the door. That's the sign. A dark house means they're not participating. A lit-up porch is an open invitation. This house had its porch light on. There were no decorations, which was a little unusual, but not unheard of. Elijah ran ahead up the front steps and knocked. The door opened almost immediately before the second knock. The man inside was not in costume. He was in regular clothes, jeans and a dark jacket. And he was looking not at Elijah, but past Elijah, at Marcus, who was still at the sidewalk. "Trick or treat," Elijah said. The man said nothing. He just kept looking at Marcus. His expression was not unfriendly exactly, but it was intensely focused in a way that didn't make sense for the situation. "Sir?" Elijah said. The man looked down at Elijah. Then, very slowly, he began to close the door without a word. "Whatever," Marcus said from the sidewalk. "Come on." Elijah ran back down the steps. Marcus grabbed his arm, and they walked quickly to the next house. Marcus told him to forget it. Some people just didn't want to be bothered on Halloween. But when Elijah looked back from the end of the block, the man had come out onto the porch. He was watching them walk away. They shortened their route and went back to find their moms. Marcus said he hadn't liked the way the man was looking at him. Not at Elijah, specifically at Marcus. Like he was assessing something. He didn't say that to Elijah at the time, but he told Elijah years later, when they were both adults, that the feeling he'd gotten on that porch step was one of the most unsettling feelings of his life. The house was looked into, gently, by a parent who brought it up with a local community association, and what they found was that the house had been listed as a vacant rental property since April of that year. The utilities, including the electricity, had been shut off at the end of August. The porch light had been on in a house with no power. That detail has no clean explanation. It has never been explained. It sits in the memory of everyone involved like a splinter that never fully worked its way out. The call from inside the party. Austin, Texas, October 31st, 2022. By the time Rachel Voss was 31, she had been to enough Halloween parties that they all blurred together. Same playlists, same spirit gum and fake blood, same conversations about who had the most creative costume. She was a good sport about it. She had friends who loved it. She went. This particular party was at a rented event space in South Austin, a large converted warehouse with exposed brick and Edison bulbs and exactly the kind of vibe that photograph well on social media. There were easily 200 people there. The music was loud. The costumes were elaborate. Rachel had come as a 1940s film noir detective, complete with a trench coat and a prop magnifying glass that she kept losing in the crowd. At approximately 10:30 p.m., her phone rang. The screen showed an unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Unknown calls at a loud party, logically, go to voicemail. But something made her step toward the edge of the room, where the noise was slightly less overwhelming, and she picked up. Silence on the other end. "Hello?" she said. A voice, low, calm, and completely at odds with the chaos of the party around her, said, "I can see your coat." Rachel froze. She looked down at her trench coat. "Who is this?" "Red lining," the voice said. Rachel's trench coat had a red lining. It was not visible unless the coat was open. She looked down. Her coat was open, but so were 50 other coats in that room. "That's not funny," she said. "Who is this?" The call disconnected. Rachel spent the next 20 minutes moving through the party with the specific hypervigilance of someone who has just been made to feel watched. She looked at every person who might be holding a phone. She looked for anyone who seemed to be tracking her. She found nothing, which is exactly the right environment for someone who wanted to stay hidden. 200 people in costumes, half of them holding drinks and phones simultaneously. She told 2 friends. One said it was probably a prank from someone at the party who'd gotten her number from a mutual contact. The other said it was creepy and she should leave. She stayed another 40 minutes and then left. She gave her number a second look and realized she had, earlier that evening, given it to a man she'd met near the bar who had offered to text her the address of an after-party. She had never texted that number and had forgotten about it almost immediately. She called the number back the next morning. Disconnected. The number no longer existed. She has never figured out who it was. There's a psychological concept that researchers who study predatory behavior have called costume opportunity. It's not a clinical term. It's an informal way of describing the reality that certain individuals, the kind of individuals that law enforcement and behavioral psychologists spend their careers studying, have historically used large public events, festivals, and holidays to operate in ways they otherwise couldn't. Anonymity is their primary tool. The denser and more chaotic the crowd, the better. Halloween is the single most concentrated expression of voluntary anonymity in American culture. And it happens at night. The stories you've read so far have a common thread. Not the costumes, not the darkness, not even the specific events, but the moment of uncertainty. The moment where a reasonable person looked at something and thought this might be normal. And that moment was exactly what someone, somewhere, was counting on. The stories in this section don't leave room for much interpretation. The Woman on the Porch, Charlotte, North Carolina, October 31, 2016. Denise Hargrove had a daughter named Lily who was 8 years old and obsessed with Cinderella. Lily had been planning her Halloween costume since July. She was going as Cinderella, full dress, glass slippers, plastic but convincing, a tiara, and a little wand with a star on it. Denise had gone all in. The costume cost more than she'd admit to her sister. They went trick-or-treating as a family. Denise, her husband Robert, Lily, and their 6-year-old son James, who had decided at the last minute that he didn't want to be a robot anymore and was wearing a sheet ghost costume that kept slipping over his eyes. The night was going wonderfully until Lily wanted to try one more street before they headed back. The street she pointed to was 1 block over from their usual circuit. Denise hesitated. It was 8:45, a little late, and they didn't know anyone on that street. But the street was well lit, and there were still other groups of trick-or-treaters moving along it, so she said yes. Midway down the block was a house with a woman sitting on the porch in a rocking chair. The woman was dressed in a long, old-fashioned gown, black, high-necked, the kind of thing you might associate with the 1800s. Her hair was pulled up tightly. She was wearing a pale, powdery face of makeup, and she was rocking slowly and watching the trick-or-treaters pass with an expression that Denise could not immediately categorize. Lily wanted to go up for candy. Denise looked at the porch. There was no candy bowl visible, no lit jack-o'-lantern, no typical indicators of a house that was handing out candy. "I don't think she's handing out candy, sweetheart," Denise said. Lily waved at the woman anyway, because Lily was 8 years old and waved at everyone. The woman stopped rocking. She focused on Lily with an intensity that made the air around Denise feel thin. Then she raised one hand, very slowly, and curled a single finger, not a wave. A beckon. "Come here." Denise took Lily's hand, and Robert, who had seen it too, put his hand on James's shoulder, and they moved on quickly without comment, not wanting to alarm the kids. At the end of the block, Robert said quietly to Denise, "Did you see that?" Denise said she'd seen it. She wasn't blinking, Robert said. That whole time we were walking past, she didn't blink once. They went home. Denise thought about calling someone, but didn't know who to call or what to say. A woman on her own porch in a costume on Halloween, however unsettling her behavior, was not reportable in any straightforward way. 3 weeks later, Denise was walking Lily home from school on a different route than usual when she passed the same street. She looked for the house with the porch. She found the address she remembered. The house was boarded up. An eviction notice from October 9th was still taped to the front door. 3 weeks before Halloween. The house had been legally unoccupied for almost a month before a woman in Victorian dress sat on its porch on Halloween night and beckoned a child to come closer. The man in the parking garage, Chicago, Illinois. October 31st, 2023. This is the most recent account in this collection, and it was submitted directly by the person involved, a woman named Patricia, who asked that only her first name be used. Patricia works in downtown Chicago and leaves her office every day at 5:30 p.m. On October 31st, 2023, she worked late. She left at 7:45. The parking garage her company uses is 3 blocks from the office building, connected by a crosswalk over Wabash Avenue. Chicago's downtown Halloween street scene was in full effect. There were costumed office workers, tourists, groups of college students. The sidewalks were loud and full. Patricia had not dressed up. She doesn't celebrate Halloween and had a project deadline. And she felt slightly at odds with the energy around her as she walked to the garage. The garage elevator opened on level 3, and she walked to her car, a gray sedan parked near the middle of the row. She was clicking her key fob when she noticed the figure at the far end of the row. It was a person in a plague doctor costume, 17th century European style, long black coat, wide-brimmed hat, and the iconic beaked mask, a long white bird skull shape that is one of the most recognizable and genuinely ancient pieces of Halloween iconography. Given the holiday, it would normally read as someone's very committed costume choice. But the figure was standing at the end of the parking row, and it was facing Patricia's car specifically. Not looking around, not moving toward an elevator or a car, just standing, hands at its sides, beak of the mask pointed directly at her. Patricia got in her car. She locked the doors. She sat for a moment, watching the figure in her rearview mirror. It hadn't moved. She drove to the garage exit the long way, circling up a level and coming back down on the other side to avoid passing the figure. She handed her ticket to the booth attendant and said, as casually as she could manage, that there was someone in a plague doctor costume on level 3 who seemed to just be standing there. The attendant looked at his monitor, the garage had cameras, and said he'd take a look. She drove home. The next morning she called the garage management office. She was told that the cameras on level 3 had experienced a technical malfunction between 7:40 p.m. and 8:10 p.m. on the night of October 31st. The malfunction had been reported and logged. No footage from that window was recoverable. The figure in the plague doctor costume was never identified. Patricia has not used that garage since. Her company has since moved to a different building with a surface lot. She said the thing that stays with her isn't the costume or the stillness or even the camera malfunction. It's the duration. She estimates from the moment she stepped off the elevator to the moment she drove away, 7 to 8 minutes elapsed. And for every one of those minutes, the figure at the end of the row did not move. "It wasn't waiting for me to leave," she said. "It felt like it was watching me figure out what to do." Before the final stories, a note. Most of what you've read has ambiguity built into it, figures who might have been strangers with bad social calibration. Situations that might have innocent explanations that simply were never found. People who were frightened, genuinely and reasonably, and then, in most cases, were okay. But the last three accounts in this collection are different. They have documentation. They have follow-up. In two of the three cases, there were legal consequences. These are not stories that end with nobody knows what happened. These are stories that end with we found out. And what we found out was worse than what we feared. If you've been reading in a well-lit room with the volume up, this is the moment to check both of those things. The second costume. Denver, Colorado, October 31st, 2019. There's a specific type of intelligence that comes from being a twin. Cassandra and Maya Flores were 29 years old, identical, and had spent their entire lives learning to read each other's behavior the way other people read faces. When Maya was nervous, Cassandra knew before Maya said a word. When Cassandra was pretending to be fine, Maya saw through it in seconds. They'd been told by every roommate, partner, and co-worker they'd ever had that communicating with one of them while the other was nearby felt uncanny, like being observed from two directions at once. On Halloween 2019, they were at a house party in the Highlands neighborhood of Denver. They'd coordinated costumes, a classic twin move, and gone as each other, wearing identical outfits with each other's names on little labels pinned to their shirts. It was a joke that everyone got. At 10 p.m., Cassandra went outside to get some air. The backyard of the house was small and lit by strung overhead lights. There were a handful of people out there, smokers, people on their phones, a couple of people who had also come out for air. And at the far corner of the backyard, leaning against the fence, was a figure in an outfit that was, Cassandra blinked, identical to the one she was wearing. Not similar, not a coincidence of fashion. The exact same white blouse, the exact same dark jeans, the exact same hair arrangement, and the exact same little label on the shirt. But the name on the label wasn't Maya, and it wasn't Cassandra. It was their home address. Cassandra walked back inside immediately and got Maya, who came out and confirmed what she was seeing. They went to the host together and said there was someone in the backyard who needed to be dealt with. The host, confused, went out with them. The figure was gone. The host checked with the other people in the backyard. Two of them had noticed the figure but assumed it was one of the twins. Nobody had looked closely at the name label. Nobody had seen the figure leave. Cassandra and Maya left the party within the hour. On the drive home, Maya said, "Our address is not public information." She was right. They'd moved to that address in July. It was not listed anywhere online under either of their names. They'd specifically checked because they'd had issues with an ex-boyfriend of Cassandra's months before. He had a history of tracking behavior. He had a restraining order against him that prohibited contact. They called the non-emergency line that night and filed a report. Due to the description and the nature of the prior complaint against the ex-boyfriend, the report was escalated. He was located 6 days later. His apartment contained photographs of both of them and a log of their movements going back to August. He was prosecuted. He is currently serving time for stalking and violation of a restraining order. The twins now live at a different address, and their location is not available in any public record. Cassandra told the investigator during the follow-up interview that the most frightening part was the label with the address. "He wanted us to know," she said. "That was the whole point of the costume. Not to hide, to tell us he knew where we lived. That was the message." The Flashlight Game. Salem, Massachusetts, October 31st, 2021. Salem on Halloween is a different category of event. If you've never been, understand this. The city of Salem, Massachusetts, processes approximately 200,000 visitors during the final week of October, with a peak concentration on October 31st itself. The streets of the historic district are shoulder to shoulder. The costumes range from elaborate to minimal. People travel from every state in the country specifically for this night. It is also, for these exact reasons, a significantly more complicated environment for safety. Thomas Reed was a Salem local who volunteered every year with a community group that provided pedestrian assistance on Halloween night, helping with crowd flow, pointing tourists toward emergency services, flagging, accessibility issues. He wore a bright yellow vest and carried a radio. He had done it 4 years in a row. At approximately 11:20 p.m., a woman approached Thomas near the Charter Street Cemetery and told him that she'd been followed. Her name was Gemma. She was visiting from upstate New York with 3 friends, all of them in costume, and she'd gotten separated from the group near the Witch Museum. She'd spent about 10 minutes trying to find them via text when she'd become aware of a person who seemed to be following her movements. Thomas walked with her while she described the person, tall, wearing a dark cloak with a hood, face completely covered by a dark mask or face paint, carrying a flashlight with a red lens cover that turned the beam a deep, dark red. "I moved 3 times, Gemma said. "Each time I moved, they moved. When I stopped, they stopped." Thomas radioed the description and walked with Gemma through the crowd until she connected with her friends near Essex Street. 14 minutes later, a second report came over the radio. A man near Pickering Wharf had made an identical description: dark cloak, red flashlight, following behavior. Thomas later told the community group debrief that there were 3 more near-identical reports that night, all within a 90-minute window, all of them describing a single person with a red lens flashlight who was systematically following individuals, always individuals, never groups, through the crowd. The Salem PD was actively looking for the figure by midnight. They never found a match. In the weeks following, 2 of the people who had reported being followed came forward to say they'd experienced contact from unknown accounts on social media containing photographs, not of their faces, but of their costumes, taken in the crowd from behind. The photographs had been sent with no message, just the image. The accounts were traced to burner phones. No further identification was made. To this day, nobody knows how many people in that crowd that night were followed without knowing it. The Last House on the Street, New Orleans, Louisiana, October 31st, 2022. This is the story that people who have read all the others find hardest to set down. Ryan Bordeaux was 44 years old, a high school history teacher, a father of 2, and a person who had never in his adult life felt afraid in his own neighborhood. He'd lived in the Treme district of New Orleans for 12 years. He knew the streets, he knew the rhythms, he knew which nights were loud and which were quiet, and how to read the city. Halloween in the Treme was reliably, beautifully chaotic. Second lines, jazz from open doorways, costumes of incredible imagination. Ryan sat on his front steps every year with a cooler of beer and a bucket of candy and considered it one of the genuinely great evenings of his year. This Halloween started exactly that way. At 7 p.m., Ryan was on his steps. Candy bucket, cooler. His neighbor, Jerome, was on his own steps 2 houses down, doing the same thing. Kids and adults in costumes moving up and down the block. Music somewhere close. At 8:30, Ryan noticed a person standing at the end of the block. The figure was wearing a costume that Ryan initially described as a Mardi Gras skeleton. Elaborate bones painted on a black suit, a skull face, a top hat. Not unusual for New Orleans, deeply appropriate for the city's visual culture. Ryan looked at it and thought, good costume. But the figure wasn't moving with the flow of the street. It was standing at the corner, and it was looking at Ryan's house. Ryan watched it for a few minutes. It didn't move. People flowed around it like water around a stone. Nobody else seemed to find it unusual, which made sense. A motionless skeleton figure on Halloween in New Orleans was not remarkable from 5 feet away. At 9:15, Ryan went inside to refresh his beer. He was in the kitchen for maybe 4 minutes. When he came back out, Jerome was standing on the sidewalk looking toward Ryan's house with an expression Ryan had never seen on his face. "Your door was open," Jerome said. Ryan looked. His front door, which he had pulled to behind him but not latched when he went inside, was wide open. He had been in the kitchen for 4 minutes. His kids were at their mother's house that night. There should have been nobody inside. Ryan called out, turned on every light in the house, checked every room. Jerome came with him, and they went through the whole house together. Nobody was there, nothing was taken, nothing was moved, nothing was disturbed, except one thing. On Ryan's kitchen table, the same table he'd passed when he went to get his beer, which had been clear and empty, there was a playing card, a joker, face up in the center of the table. Ryan had no deck of cards in the house. He never bought playing cards. His children were 7 and 10 and had no interest in cards. There was no explanation for the joker being there. He called the police. They came, took a report, noted the card. They treated it seriously, but found no evidence of forced entry, no DNA, no footage. His porch camera had been pointed at the street, and the angle of his door opening was outside its frame. Ryan still lives in the same house. He has a completely new lock system, a camera that covers the door at every angle, and a neighbor arrangement with Jerome where they never leave their respective front steps unattended on Halloween. He still has the Joker card. He keeps it in a drawer and doesn't look at it, but he can't bring himself to throw it away. When he was asked why, he said, "Because it means it was real. And for some reason, the worst part about all of it, worse than the card, worse than not knowing who was in my house, is the fact that they didn't take anything. They just left something behind. They wanted me to know they were there. And they got exactly what they wanted. 10,000 words, hundreds of miles. Multiple states, multiple years, multiple people who had something in common before this night and had something else in common after it. They all looked at Halloween differently. Not with hatred for the holiday. None of these people stopped celebrating entirely or railed against costumes or tried to convince their communities that October 31st was something to fear as a concept. They were smarter than that. They knew that Halloween is overwhelmingly full of people in good faith having a genuinely wonderful time. But they also understood something that most people never learn because they're lucky enough not to have to. The night doesn't know the difference between pretend and real. The mask doesn't know the difference either. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, and it doesn't take often, the person wearing one knows that you don't know the difference. And they're counting on exactly that. Have a safe Halloween, check your surroundings, walk in groups after dark. Trust what your body tells you before your rational mind talks it down. And if something feels wrong, a figure too still, a presence too close, a moment that doesn't fit, don't spend those 2 seconds deciding if it's normal. Move first, decide later.